My name is Laura. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today. I've done a few things. My mom is very proud. You don't need to worry too much about them, but you can go check them out if you like. I'm going to start today with a little bit of a warning. The theme of today's talk is inspired by and linked to the events of the COVID pandemic. Now, I'm not here today to make light of it. I'm not here to make jokes and fun at the expense of all of the harm that has been done. But there are some important lessons we can all take away from the last 2 years that we may not have even realized we were learning at the time. You see, in the world right now, there are 30 million software developers, and that's growing at a rate of 6% a year, or 1.2 million. Raise your hand if you are one of those people. Software devs, raise your hand. Oh, there's like 6 of you here. Next time, let's aim for more. We can do 10. The problem is, right, that's exactly the problem. Raise your hand if you're a security consultant, pen tester. Yeah, we're missing a group from the room, right? The world, and I mean our world, we kind of like to believe we're a bit further along with AppSec than perhaps we are. There's only about 2% of organizations who are really doing all of the things that we read about and hear about in conferences. Some of us are what we call fragmented explorers, so we're trying to do some stuff, but we're kind of like, it's kind of working, it's kind of not, don't touch that, definitely don't touch that bit. Raise your hand if that's you, fragmented explorers. Yeah, any of you in emerging, we have no idea what we are doing. There we go, some honesty. Now, how is this all linked to COVID? Well, let me explain. While all of us had our little holidays over the last couple of years where we, stayed home and, learned how to make sourdough or tuck up knitting again or whatever it was you did to pass the hours and days, I realized that I was seeing something in the real world that I'd been talking about for years play out. I was seeing malware in action. I was seeing a virus propagating through a network. Now, this probably speaks more to the way that my brain processes information than a healthy use of pandemic time, but just roll with it. We saw one person get infected, and it spread to others, and it spread to others, and we saw the harm it caused. And for the first time in my entire life, my mom understood what I did for a living. She was like, oh, I get it now. I was like, oh, great, fantastic. Well, we can't teach everyone with a pandemic. It's not the most effective security awareness strategy. But what we can do is we can take the lessons from the pandemic and the things that we used as communities to keep us safer and to reduce harm in application security. So I'm going to go through these quickly. Now, I'm also going to give you a little spoiler for the end. Raise your hand if you like challenges. Raise your hand if you like irritatingly extroverted people who are going to challenge you to do things. Fantastic. We're going to be great friends. So, at the end, that's coming. But let's start with tracing. One of the core things we started doing in the pandemic was tracing the contacts we'd been around, the locations we had been to. In New Zealand, we had this application. It deployed in the space of about 8 weeks, which, to be honest, for a big piece of software that got deployed to 2.8 million people, that's actually pretty impressive. And I know that there was an equivalent COVID-safe app here in Australia. And the idea of this was to understand where we fit into this network of people, because you were connected to people you interacted with every day that you saw in places, and that connection could cause you harm. Now, this picture here is from Ivanka, so this is not a rickroll. You can actually safely go to these. This is a picture of a tiny part of the NPM ecosystem. Now, I feel like my talk was actually set up perfectly today by the lovely Alex to start the day with, when we realize how connected all of our software is together. From the Mac OS that he talked about, to the Linux VM, to Docker, to Alex's creative take on Docker. All of it is connected. We're looking here at one package, Browserify, which is linked directly to 172 other packages in the ecosystem. Now, that's great. How many of you are secretly going, yeah, but it's Node, and Node is a mess, so it's okay? It's all right. I see you people. But it's okay, because I'm an equal opportunities destroyer of ecosystems, because all of the ecosystems are a connected mess. Where NPM might have 2.37 million packages, which are all linked together by dependency chains, each one of them is only 7 lines of code on average. For those of you in the .NET world who are like, oh yeah, well, we have big libraries, grown-up libraries, we don't do this. Yes, you have less libraries, but you connect 2,000 lines of code to 2,000 lines of code, which means you have the same problem. It's just harder to review. Now, what does this mean? What are we talking about? We're talking about transitive risk. The risk as software inherits from other software. Because none of us build software from scratch. We don't go to a terminal with an empty screen and go, I am going to craft the beloved software that all mankind will worship. We go, oh, good God, I need to do a list thing again. Where do I find the list thing? And where's that bit of code that I wrote 3 years ago? I've done this before. And we copy and paste it, and we inherit it from other places. And we inherit the bugs that come with that code. Now, this is the root of supply chain attacks. The technologies that we build our systems from make us vulnerable. Let's look at a case in point. How many of you have used Heroku? If you haven't, try it out. This story aside, it is actually kind of a helpful tool. Heroku is a platform as a service operation. So it's now owned by Salesforce, and they host 13 million applications, many of which are free, 9,500 paying customers. So if we're talking about inheriting vulnerabilities from the technologies that we use, then if we chose to use Heroku, then we're going to inherit the flaws that Heroku has. Okay, straightforward. Now, if I'm writing a shopping list application, that's probably not a big deal. Yeah, me and my 3 friends are going to get hurt, and that's the end of it. But what if somebody compromises Heroku, and I just take 3 of the case studies off their website as to what's hosted on Heroku right now? So, Citrix GoToMeeting. Nobody ever does video chats. Remote working is dead. We all live in offices. So this is definitely not a problem. DNS. So there are DNS companies that host their stuff on Heroku. So if you compromise Heroku, you can compromise DNS. Now, this shouldn't be a surprise because DNS is always the problem. And then finally, ThinkMD, and this is just 3 of their case studies. So this is a healthcare app. This is doctor-patient information. Fantastic. So when we say we're connected to Heroku because we've chosen to host on it, if Heroku is compromised, then all of those apps are compromised. Now, is this theoretical? Absolutely not. And hug ups to the Heroku team, who in April this year found that the private keys to all of the applications hosted on their instances were leaked. So, as an attacker, our supply chain attack against Heroku was very, very productive. Remember, our attackers are not silly. They're not even lazy. They are brutally efficient. This is economies of scale for software security. We don't need to just worry about the pretty interface we wrote in Vue or whatever it is, the framework of choices for the day. We have to think about every piece of technology that technology is in turn made up of. And every piece of technology that we have hosted on, that we use in our dev life cycle. Alex's Docker talk being a prime example of this. That's not the code you wrote. That's the code you used to write your code. How many of you feel like AppSec is a fun, healthy space to get a job in? Yeah, you've got a job for life. One of the problems we have is we don't ask the essential questions. So my first takeaway for you today, if you were going to go down the contact tracing route and bring COVID to your AppSec, is understand what your applications are made from, all of it. Every last bit, because every last bit of that is going to bring you vulnerability. Next up, we're going to talk about distancing. So this is where we all stayed home and made sourdough. Great, wonderful. Now, our posters in New Zealand look like this. We wear a mask to keep out, well, let's face it, our spit separate from other people. We keep ourselves physically distant by standing apart or staying home. It's important. Now, in AppSec, we have a similar concept. If the attacker is a bear on the screen right now, so they're generally quite confused. They're in a conference in Brisbane, they're not native, and they don't know how they got here. And the camera person at the back there is a jar of honey, which is our stereotypical stand-in for whatever the bear might fancy to eat today. In AppSec, we try and put as much distance as possible between the bad thing and the thing that the bad thing wants. Now, we could use, for example, bear traps. We could try and prevent the bear from getting there. But the problem is, one bear trap in the middle of this room isn't going to solve the problem, because that bear is just going to run over all of you. Raise your hands if you're like, I'm running for the exit at this point, and raise your hand if you're going to take a selfie instead. You're going first. Fantastic. That's a control all of its own. The other thing we can do is we can have cameras. Maybe our bear trap isn't going to work, so we'll have cameras to spot that the bear has arrived, and maybe we could go and negotiate. This is a detective control, and in AppSec we have those too. So we try and stop the bad things, we try and spot when they're going to happen. Now, if you read a lot of marketing materials, we call this zero trust. Now, for the record, zero trust is not something you buy, so next time you see a vendor who's trying to sell you that, you don't buy this. Zero trust is that cynical bit of you that says, you're a stranger, I don't know you, I'm not going to trust you, and I'm just going to take some steps to protect myself. It's like keeping your wallet close to you in a crowd. You don't trust anybody, you take basic steps to prevent harm. In AppSec, we do this. So our distancing, these basic steps we can do to keep the bad thing away from the thing we're protecting, looks like many different things. Now, how can you actually do this yourself? Well, first things first. I'm going to introduce you some bits of the OWASP project you've probably never seen before. Raise your hand if you don't know what OWASP is. Oh, good. All right. For those of you who are new, OWASP is the Open Web Application Security Project, but don't be confused by the name. It's not just web apps anymore. This diagram here is from a set of free architecture diagrams that they give you. That's just there for you to use. That shows you how to keep your sensitive thing away from your dangerous thing through software architecture. So one of the steps we can take as development teams and as those protecting development teams is embracing these architectural patterns. We don't even have to invent them ourselves. It's been done for us. This is a payments gateway. If you're writing a payments gateway, there's only really a few ways you're going to do that. So let's use some common, well-trodden architectures. Here's some bits of OWASP you might want to go and check out. So OWASP Threat Dragon, which is amazing. It's a threat modeling tool for those of you who can't stand Microsoft Stride, and the horrible, horrible tool it comes with. The Threat Modeling Cookbook, which is where the diagram on the previous slide came from. The Threat Modeling Manifesto, which is a great introduction primer as to how to understand distancing in your software architectures. And then finally, Awesome Threat Modeling, if you Google that, is a GitHub list full of threat modeling resources, most of which are free of charge you can get going with straight away today. Testing. How many of you took a COVID test in the last 6 months? Yeah, we all did. Testing was really, really key to the COVID response, and many of us are still doing it now. And that's good. We should be. And testing is key in software, not just penetration testing. Let's face it, that's a little bit late in the process. The cake has already been baked at this point. We're already tasting it. We want to be testing a little bit earlier. Now, what does that look like? Well, for AppSec teams, it looks like vulnerability scanning. Now, this, in the real world, in our COVID world, is the equivalent of walking into Bunnings and having your temperature checked on the way in. It's not going to tell you you have COVID, but if your temperature is high, it's a sign that a bad thing is happening. And opposed to that, the more complex version is our automated testing. So looking for very specific sets of symptoms, like we did in COVID. So with our PCR test, for example, or the nasal swabs, going, yeah, you specifically have the 6 things that mean that this is the case. To do AppSec with COVID in mind, this is what we need. We need both of these, because the automated testing can take too much work. It can be too much time. So we balance it with vulnerability scanning that is an early warning system that something's going wrong. And you've been doing this for 2 years with a contagious disease. Now, one note on this, when you're choosing when and where to do your testing, you've got some choices, and we did the same in COVID times. So we can do manual testing on demand. We'll just go and test. So that's your equivalent of, I've got some symptoms, I'm going to go do a thing right now. And that's really important. Always test when you need to in that moment. You can integrate it into your pipeline. That would be the equivalent of coming to CrikeyCon today, and on the way in, they swabbed your nose, and you had to wait outside until you got your result, and then you can come through the door. It's integrated in your entrance in the building. And that's like putting it in your CI/CD pipeline. Now, the problem with that is there are a lot of you, and if we decided we were going to test you one by one at the door and let you in one by one, we'd still not be going right now. And this is what we do to application development pipelines when we throw security tools in. We go, hey, so your build time takes 6 minutes? Would you like it to be 6 hours? I bet you would. And that's what we do. We throw an ugly piece of regex in. Sorry, code people. I'm sure your tools are better than this now. Much. We throw that into the pipeline and say, yeah, sorry about the delays, folks, but it's for security. Now, how well do you think this goes? About as well as you can imagine. People talk about instead having a parallel pipeline. So I'll do all my security testing in a separate channel. That's the equivalent of coming to CrikeyCon today, having your little test taken at the start, walking in, giving hugs to your friends, and then about 20 minutes in going, oh, hey, you've got COVID. Sorry about that, get out. There's a slight problem with that, right? The ship has sailed. We've already become contagious. We're already doing it. So when you're thinking about where to put any testing in your application development lifecycle, I want you to think about these things. Now, for those of you going, God, this is a lot of analogies. Dear God, where's the tech? Do you know? Tech is sometimes a bit of a distraction. Nothing I'm saying here is divorced from the technology. I'm just using different framework to explain it. And you might find that sometimes explaining it in a way that doesn't dive into the tech avoids some of the distractions that going straight to a framework can. So what's next? Well, prevention. So that would be vaccinations for most of us, or staying home. Now, in software, we like to call this updating, which Alex, again, did demonstrate this morning is somewhat optional if you can edit the right bits of code, but we're going to jump over that. Raise your hand if you have code that you look after, even if you're not a coder, that you're supposed to keep it safe and warm and happy. Oh, the rest of you do, you just don't know it. Go find it. There's reasons why I know that everyone who raised their hand has out-of-date packages in their life cycle. And it's not because they're lazy. It's because they're working on legacy projects. It's because that code hasn't been built in 6.5 years. It's because that code was built by an intern, but it does the job, so why break it? It's because when they did a patch for that particular security vulnerability, they rolled up 17 different breaking changes into the same package and said, go at it. And it's going to cost you 60 hours of time to get that patch in. Patching is not as straightforward as we like to say. We like to say, just patch your stuff. There's a reason that's been on our threat list for 15 years. It's not easy. Now, in software, we have a few strategies we can take. We can fork and fix. So I'll take your ugly baby code, I will fix it and love it and look after it, and then it will be mine forever. The problem is you now have to take care of this code forever, on top of your already slightly precious code. The problem with this is it gets you out of the lifecycle for other updates, so that's not going to work. We could ignore it. Raise your hand if you're Team YOLO. It'll be fine. Nobody will know who we are. I love Team YOLO. We could take no action, and in fact, sometimes that's the right thing to do. Some bits of code are nowhere near being exposed to harm, but it really is a big decision to make, so, be careful. We could change the library. I know, we found some code with some SQL injection in. Let's change to, what could we use instead? Mongo. Awesome. Fabulous. We are going all in. No more SQL databases. No, even better. Let's do Cassandra. I read about it in a blog post. Right. Now we have more problems. What problems do we have? Does anyone think they know? Other than we're using a hipster technology that nobody in the room probably knows exists? Well, now you have key person risk, because there's probably only 7 people in the country who could be an expert level Cassandra DBA at this point. And now you've taken that technology that you reasonably understood and replaced it with something that could be fragile in new ways. Yeah, sure. The important lesson here isn't that, oh my God, we're all doomed. It's we have to take preventative steps, but not just for the easy cases. So the people who can just patch everything every day. We also have to consider the edge cases when we can't patch. What can we do instead? I live with somebody who's immunocompromised, who can't be vaccinated because it might cause them other harm. So we have to stay home a lot. Coming to a conference like this is actually quite a big deal for me because I'm changing my risk model. And this is what we have to do in AppSec too. Finally, response. So if you're unlucky enough to get COVID, I've had my dash, many of you will have done yours. My brother has now had it 3 times because he's a paramedic, but that's, his world. There were plans. Now, in New Zealand, they sent us this big yellow one here, but because we're not in New Zealand right now, I've also included an airline safety card, which is the incident response plan you've been familiar with since you first got on an aeroplane and didn't realize you understood incident response, but secretly did. It's a concise way to tell you what to do when the bad thing happens. And we're used to this. Raise your hand if you've written an incident response plan. Raise your hand if you've read one. Raise your hand if you've read the one for your actual organization. Okay, those of you who didn't raise your hand, have fun. Happy reading. Every team needs an incident response plan. Now, I'm not just talking about the big corporate one here that says, if we get ransomware, here's what we do. I'm talking about an application development incident response plan. So what if you get an account compromise? So somebody rings your call center and says, hey, so my account's got some weird transactions on it. I think somebody's cracked my password and they've got in. Great, what do you do then? What do you do if 5 minutes later the information shows that that person was somebody significant? So a prime minister, for example, or, somebody in the celebrity space. Does it change your plan? What if it turns out that you get 2,000 of these requests from different users over a period of time? All of these types of scenarios are not typically covered in a standard incident response plan. They're not. What happens is it comes into the security team, hopefully, from the support team, and then eventually an abstract ticket makes it to your developers. And they're like, oh, fix this thing. But they lack the context as to where this has all come from and what the nuance is, what the situation is. So build the incident response plan for your development team. It's super important. It doesn't need to be complex. It just needs 4 steps. I'm going to be unconventional here. Screw the MITRE frameworks on this one. Screw what NIST says. I do not need an 800-page PDF. I need 4 steps. How do I know a bad thing has happened? Identification. How do I know it's definitely a bad thing? Verification. How do I stop the bad thing from spreading over everything that I know and love? Containment. How do I fix this so I can actually go home tonight? Remediation. All you need to do is loop the last 3 steps. Now, if you are wanting to do this, the best way to approach it is to bring out your inner nerd. Raise your hand if you liked D&D when you were younger. Honestly, it was when you were younger. You definitely don't play now. Absolutely. This is D&D all the way through. You gather your team. Now, I don't mean your security team. You need new friends, because no party is going to survive with just security people. You need customer success. You need marketing. You need legal. You need development. And you need them all in one room together. Plan your scenarios. Now, don't just go, well, we would go and read the logs and act like that happened. I want you to go find those logs. Do they even exist? How much do you have? How hard are they to get to? Is the right information there? And I want you to practice it, test it, and then you have an incident response plan. A PDF document that says incident response plan is not enough. You need to have evidence you've done this, you've tried it out. And that's the 5 things we took from COVID. We traced, we distanced, we tested, we prevented, and finally, we learned how to respond. Now, what does this have to do with a team of 30 million software developers? Well, there's too much software in the world for this to be about cybersecurity. They say that there's 3.5 million cybersecurity jobs in the world right now. Great, wonderful. All of you looking for jobs? Literally, there are 3.5 million of them, and many of the employers are in there. Raise your hand if you're recruiting today. Loud, come on, up high. Look, seriously, just look to your left and right. If you're looking for a job, there's no need to. They're here. But we can't solve it with 3.5 million. The unspoken truth of that number is we don't need that. We need 10 times that amount. We need the team of 30 million. We need every single software developer in the world to do application security. So I'm going to ask you if you'd like to join me in doing something ridiculous. Raise your hand if you would like to join me in doing something that Google described 3 weeks ago as ridiculous. Fabulous, good. Now, this is part 1 of 2. The other half of this announcement comes at B-Sides Melbourne next Sunday. But this one is just for you. So from November this year, SafeStep, my company, we are a company, but we have a massive purpose. I am fed up of waiting for the world to train the future of software developers. So screw it, we're going to do it. From November, we are offering free, secure development training, our full catalog, no strings, no tricks, no gimmicks, no sales, to every new software development graduate in New Zealand and Australia. If you work for a university, come and talk to me. I want to know how to get to your graduates. If you are a student and you are graduating, come find me. I'm going to hook you up with some training. I'm not doing this because I want a legacy. My legacy is a pencil note in a recipe book that nobody knows why the hell it's there, but it makes the cake taste better. My legacy is getting every graduate in an entire country or 2, how hard could that be, to do security, and you're going to help me. So after this, come find me. Come find me on the socials, on LinkedIn. I'm not difficult to find. I'm the girl in the pink jacket. And you can tell me how you're going to help me find the next generation, how we are going to train them together. Now, if you're an organization that's sat there saying, we could help with this, come find me too. If you have a product that these students should be learning how to use, come find me. Let's get them hooked up. Because we are not going to get there one person at a time. We need a team of 30 million, and I'm ready for you to join it now. Thank you.